Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise on behalf of the Tasmanian Greens to deliver my response to the Premier's State of the State address. And before I begin, to acknowledge that we are standing on the land of the Muanina people and to pay my respects to the Palawa and the Pakana people of Tasmania, to pay tribute to their warriors and their elders past, present and emerging, to acknowledge that there is a long way to go before true reconciliation is a reality, Madam Speaker, and to recommit the Greens to land returns, to changing the date of Australia Day and, of course, to treaty. Madam Deputy Speaker, and I was disappointed not to hear either of the Premier or the Leader of the Opposition acknowledge the Aboriginal people of Tasmania in their State of the State addresses. And I want to take this opportunity to remind the House that there was a treaty with the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. It was made on the 6th of August 1831, Madam Deputy Speaker, and these are the words of George Augustus Robinson. This morning I developed my plans to the Chief Manalagenna and explained to him the benevolent views of the government towards himself and people. He cordially acquiesced and expressed his entire approbation of the salutary measure and promised his utmost aid and assistance. I informed him in the presence of Kikatapola that I was commissioned by the Governor to inform them that, if the natives would desist from their wanted outrages upon the whites, they would be allowed to remain in their respective districts and would have flour, tea and sugar, clothes, etc. given them. That a good white man would dwell with them, who would take care of them and would not allow any bad white man to shoot them. And he would go with them about the bush like myself, and they could hunt. He was much delighted. And further, on the 27th of August 1831, Robinson reported, "I omit no opportunity of impressing upon the mind of the Chief and the others that they are to remain in their own country, and that I am anxious to get them for the purposes of going to others, and that I will leave a man to take care of them, and that some of Tyree Law women shall stay with them. At this arrangement they are much pleased and say it is very good indeed." Madam Deputy Speaker, you attended the inaugural reconciliation address at Town Hall last year on behalf of the then Premier. Ms White attended that address as well, and we were presented with compelling evidence that there is unfinished business that this Parliament must deal with. There was an agreement between the Palawa Pakana people of Tasmania and the colonial administration. And according to the Dean of the UTAS Law School, Professor Tim McCormack, this agreement carries legal weight. And he cited the Supreme Court of Canada, case R v Sioux of 1990, about the treaty between the British and the Huron tribe that was made in 1760, and that treaty was determined to have legal weight to this day. Treaties with First People, said the court, must be given a just, broad and liberal construction, with uncertainties resolved in favour of the Indigenous peoples. What characterises a treaty is the intention to create obligations, the presence of mutually binding obligations, and a certain measure of solemnity. Now, Madam Speaker, having attended the inaugural address, and being presented with such compelling historical evidence, I wrote to both the then Premier and to the Leader of the Opposition saying that the Greens wanted to work constructively to advance this issue, that we wanted to work together to develop a form of words that could come before this House that progressed the debate on recognising the 1831 agreement and moving towards treaty. Regrettably, and I say that for Aboriginal people in Tasmania, I have received no response either from the then Premier or the current Premier or the Leader of the Opposition. That is shameful. So I can indicate today, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we will be engaging with Aboriginal people around Tasmania on this issue of the 1831 agreement. I've already started doing that, and that if we can't get a constructive approach to this issue from our colleagues in government and in opposition, we will table a motion in this place that seeks to ensure Parliament recognises there was an agreement in 1831 between the state of Tasmania, its administrators, and the Aboriginal people of the northeast of Tasmania. And I do hope that my colleagues in here are able to recognise the importance of resolving this unfinished business, Madam Speaker. I also hope that following the release of the inquiry report into the House of Assembly Restoration Bill, which made a very clear recommendation that a joint House committee be established to develop a preferred model for Aboriginal representation in the Tasmanian Parliament, I hope that too is an issue that we can find a consensus on, because it's not about us. It's about the First People of Tasmania, the fact that they are not represented as a people in the Tasmanian Parliament. And there are examples, for example, New Zealand, where the Maori people have a clear, strong, self-determining place at the table. There are examples for us to follow, Madam Speaker. We have to deal with this issue because the injustice, as we found in the committee inquiry, is deep. And it is holding Aboriginal people back, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this time last year when we were delivering our State of the State addresses, Australia was a very different place. A very different place. The Blue Mountains, the forests of the Blue Mountains, they were still there, Madam Deputy Speaker. But we have been through this past summer the most devastating bushfires this country has ever experienced. And in fact, according to Professor John Shine, the President of the Australian Academy of Science, the scale of these bushfires is unprecedented anywhere in the world. More than 25 million acres of land, an area about the size of South Korea, was burned. 33 people lost their lives. 3,000 homes and properties were destroyed. An estimated 1 billion native animals died, Madam Deputy Speaker. And of course, because of the vast volume of smoke and carbon dioxide and other toxic particulates that came out of those bushfires, our contribution to global heating this year as a result of the bushfires is even higher. And that's a feedback loop, Madam Deputy Speaker, where the fires are creating the circumstances for further global heating, Madam Speaker. And Tasmania, this summer, we didn't confront the horror of the bushfires that were being felt on the mainland. I was disappointed, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the government didn't move for a condolence motion in response to the bushfires. I did suggest it, but it didn't happen. But the scale, the tragic scale of these fires, the devastation is mind-numbing, Madam Deputy Speaker, and we are only just beginning to come to terms with it. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, on a personal note, and I'm sure this is a feeling that was felt by millions of Australians, the horror and the grief that I felt was crushing, because we are now made aware that summer in Australia will never be the same. Summer, which was a season that we always looked forward to, is now a season where climate-induced bushfires are more and more prevalent. And we did escape this year. We didn't in the previous year. And the cycle is now such that we can expect to see devastating bushfire seasons in Tasmania on a much more regular cycle. So that requires of us as a parliament to think differently, to do things differently, to try to work together on these big issues, because Tasmanians are looking to us for leadership. Madam Deputy Speaker, and I certainly came back from the break more determined than ever to be part of the solution and to work with Dr Woodruff in this place to drive evidence-based policy, to listen to the science, to promote new ideas, to try to bat off as much of the politics as it's possible to do so, because our children are looking to us for leadership, Madam Deputy Speaker, and our children are looking for meaningful climate action, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now I have to just go to some of the issues that were raised by the Leader of the Opposition in a depressingly beige contribution, Madam Deputy Speaker. There was lip service to the need for climate action. The words were simply that tackling climate change can create jobs. Well, Tasmanians expect a bit more than that from the opposition, and in a contribution in which at least half was spent talking about either the government or the Greens, very few meaningful ideas about how we tackle global heating together were put forward. But we did hear some highly partisan and untrue language that I need to challenge before the lunch break. Ms White says the Greens are holding the state back. Well, we were there to defend the Franklin River from damming, and today Strahan is a thriving tourism town. We've always been there to defend the forests from felling, and today, thanks to the work of conservationists over a decade, large tracts of our forest are safe from logging. We have always been there to defend the wilderness, and as a result of the advocacy of conservationists over decades, large tracts of our wilderness are protected. The work that the Greens have done, Madam Deputy Speaker, has strengthened Tasmania's clean, green wilderness brand. We stood up against a pulp mill at Wesley Vale and in the Tamar Valley, both projects which were supported by the Liberal and Labor parties. It is the clean, green wilderness brand, Madam Speaker, that underpins the successes of our agricultural sector, our exporters and our tourism industry. Madam Speaker, if the Greens and the conservation movements had not been such an important feature of political life in Tasmania, the Franklin would have been dammed. There'd have been Labor's pulp mill on the Tamar Valley or the Liberals' pulp mill at Wesley Vale. There'd have been a canal estate in the Ralphs Bay conservation area. There would be fish farms on every coast and corner, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is the Labor and Liberal parties who are holding this state back because they refuse to see it for what it is, Madam Speaker. It is a beautiful, wild little island with a strong and close-knit community which our political colleagues keep trying to divide. It is an island that is kissed by 3 oceans, Madam Deputy Speaker. There's more coastline per unit area in Tasmania than any other state or territory. There are 334 islands that make up our archipelago. We breathe the cleanest air in the world. We are home to the world's tallest flowering plant, Eucalyptus regnans. We are the custodians of one of the world's great and last tracts of temperate rainforest. We are an island of Gondwana, Madam Deputy Speaker. The reason Tasmania looks so different from the rest of Australia, Madam Deputy Speaker, is because we were connected to Antarctica for a lot longer than the rest of mainland Australia. We have plants, animals, birds and fish here that you cannot find anywhere else in the world. We have Aboriginal heritage in places like Takena, the Tarkine, which reaches back a human story of 40, 50 or 60,000 years. The Tarkine coast contains some of the richest archaeological sites on the planet, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this is the coast, of course, that the Liberals want to open up four-wheel drive tracks through. We also have a rich and beautiful and intact European cultural heritage landscape. We have a culture of community and connection. We are still the nation's biggest per capita givers. When Tasmanians are in trouble, it doesn't matter what your politics are. We look after each other. There is that privilege of being part of a connected island community. We have an extraordinary culture of creativity. And partly, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is because of the landscape and because of the light. We are at the same latitude, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the southern hemisphere than Tuscany. We welcome strangers and we make sure they don't feel like strangers for long. We are an island with heart, Madam Deputy Speaker. We are a little green, heart-shaped island at the bottom of the world, and we are so, so privileged to call ourselves Tasmanians. And with that comes a deep responsibility to look after this place. It is rare and magical in the world, Madam Deputy Speaker. And when we have to listen to the sort of bollocks that came out of the Leader of the Opposition about the role of the Greens in looking after this island, when they've been complicit in putting forward pulp mills and canal estates and massive deforestation, is galling and completely unsurprising. Come the next election, I don't think it'll be Ms White leading the Labor Party. So I don't know if this sort of speech is...
There you go.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before the break, I was making some observations about the Leader of the Opposition's contribution. And just in closing, we heard a lot about Labor being focused on jobs with very little detail on any understanding they might have about the job needs of now or tomorrow. But I'll simply remind Labor that without brand integrity in Tasmania, jobs will not grow and jobs will be at risk if you don't protect the attributes of your clean, green wilderness brand. You potentially compromise jobs in tourism and amongst our exporters. And just finally, Ms White states that it was a mistake for Labor to go into government with the Greens. Well, all I might say is that the previous Premier, Lara Giddings, who we worked with in government, told us, the now Senator Nick McKim and I, that we were two of her best ministers. And she made it really clear to us, Madam Speaker, that she trusted us more than she did some of her own colleagues. So, Madam Speaker...
Order.
Well, I just won't have history being rewritten, and in fact the object of her distrust is the same problem you've got.
I sat at that table.
The same problem you've got.
I know.
So, Madam Speaker, we know that Tasmania, our identity is very much embedded in this place, and our islandness and the fact that we have a wilderness on our doorstep. And sometimes when I'm thinking about this place and its history, I remember that beautiful Red Gum song about the Franklin. Oh, Tasmania, the hardest heart would understand. But I've been listening to the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition's contribution and thinking, well, those hard hearts don't really understand this island very well, and there's no indication from either the Premier or the Leader of the Opposition that they recognise the seriousness of the climate emergency that we're in for very testing times. In fact, it was confirmed in Senate estimates yesterday that according to the Commonwealth Environment Department, we are looking at a 4 degrees Celsius rise in temperature within the next 80 years in Australia. This is a climate emergency, Madam Speaker, and in declaring one, you are not being alarmist, you are simply acknowledging the facts and resolving as a collective of the Tasmanian Parliament to work together to enable actions, policies and funding that enable our community to be better equipped to cope with the very testing times that are ahead, Madam Speaker. And on that basis, we will be tabling in the next session our Safe Climate Bill 2020. Madam Speaker, it will establish a joint standing committee on a safe climate to inquire into, consider and report to the Parliament on any matter referred to the committee by either House relating to the climate emergency. It will establish a Safe Climate Commission to provide advocacy and advice to the government and community for actions on the climate emergency. It will establish iterative emissions reduction targets for sectors and require the government of the day to establish policies to meet these targets. It provides a framework in which the government needs to establish that meeting one or more targets would be unreasonable or unduly harmful in order to not progress policies to meet those targets. It would create a new normal of reducing emissions, reversing the onus of proof to favour action over inaction. It sets targets for increasing our carbon sequestration activities and sets requirements for climate adaptation at state and local levels. And Madam Speaker, we would hope that every member of this House, on examining our legislation, recognises it's well thought out, it is future-focused, it's achievable, reasonable and necessary. Parliament cannot be content with amending the Climate Change State Action Act of 2008. That bill is 9/10 of useless, Madam Speaker, and I know that because I used to administer that legislation in the Labor Green government. The Safe Climate Act will allow us to deliver that new thinking with a strong governance framework for climate emissions reduction and adaptation. And it's a matter of regret that we haven't heard from either the Premier or the Leader of the Opposition about what their plans are to help Tasmanians adapt to this rapidly changing climate. And we have to be driven by the science, Madam Speaker. It is deeply frustrating to both Dr Woodruff and I to listen to the kind of puerile commentary we've had on climate-related issues in this place over the last couple of years at least. We have to acknowledge that the climate is changing rapidly and this will impact on every aspect of the lives of Tasmanians. It will impact on our food security and our water security. It needs to drive change in the way we build houses and large-scale developments, Madam Speaker, and it absolutely must redefine our relationship with the natural environment. Now, Madam Speaker, I've made the point in here in recent days that business as usual is not only not an option, it is recklessly dangerous. What the scientists are now telling us, and they have the experience of last summer's bushfires to guide them, is that logging of native forests increases bushfire risk in intensity and severity. It leaves kindling and undergrowth on the forest floor, and it allows to regrow trees that are all of a similar height and size. And this creates a highly combustible scenario. And Sustainable Timbers Tasmania and the Minister and the Premier, who is also the Liberal Minister for Climate Change, need to urgently come to terms with this, because to continue native forest logging in that knowledge is recklessly dangerous, it risks lives, and it exposes the government in future to civil liability claims, because they will know the information is there, the science is confirmed, and it's come out of the University of Tasmania, the University of Melbourne and Australian National University. And this provides us, Madam Speaker, with an opportunity to redefine our relationship with the natural environment in Tasmania, to work with the forest industry on transition, to make better use of the 310,000 hectares of plantation that we have here in Tasmania, to make sure that our forest industry is part of strengthening our clean, green wilderness brand, not undermining it, and to make sure we don't enable the forest industry in Tasmania to place communities and individuals at risk of more extreme bushfires in the future. Madam Speaker, we will be moving this year to abolish the minimum sawlog quota. It is well past time that awful provision in the Forest Management Act Tasmania of 2013 was dealt with. So we will move to abolish Section 16 of the Forest Management Act of 2013, which establishes wood production supply, and it requires Sustainable Timbers Tasmania to make available each year 137,000 cubic metres of forest timber. So, Madam Speaker, Dr Woodruff and I, on behalf of the Tasmanian Greens, are not going to stand by and let this government and Labor continue with business as usual unchecked. And places like the Tarkine on the northwest coast of Tasmania, which for any person with empathy and a soul for the planet and the life it sustains could not in all conscience consider destroying. And that is what is happening under the Liberals, and Labor is cheering them on. There is clear felling operations happening in wet sclerophyll and rainforest parts of the Tarkine, Madam Speaker. It is a disgrace that any government would think that that was acceptable or moral, Madam Speaker, because it is not. We have to end the plunder of our beautiful natural forests. We have to provide habitat for our endemic species. And wouldn't it be terrific, Madam Speaker, if in this place we had a sense of Tasmania as being like an ark, a place that is a haven for the natural world and for threatened and endangered species, where we've seen 1 billion animals die on the mainland and forests destroyed, many of which will never recover. Madam Speaker, it places an enormous responsibility on us to do things differently and to be an ark for the natural world. And that would strengthen our clean, green and wilderness brand, Madam Speaker. We have to protect our national parks and our World Heritage Area and recognise that they are there not just for the people of Tasmania or Australia, they belong to the world, Madam Speaker. And under this government, there's been a degrading of wilderness values, a privatisation of public protected areas, and an alienation of the Tasmanian people from their enjoyment of their own public lands. The expressions of interest process, Madam Speaker, for development inside public protected areas is becoming increasingly unpopular in the community. For two primary reasons. One, because people recognise it's a form of privatisation. And two, because they recognise that the whole process is developer-driven and underpinned by utter secrecy through the Office of the Coordinator General. And now we know, Madam Speaker, now we know that since the Liberals took office, since 2014, the number of licences to operate on national parks and reserves has increased from 152 to 515. And that the number of exclusive leases over protected areas has doubled to 136. Madam Speaker, these parks, they belong to the people of Tasmania, they do not belong to developers, and they do not belong to the Liberal Party. Protecting our wilderness is a plank of our Green New Deal, Madam Speaker. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's special report on global warming, which projected that we're heading to 1.5 degrees at best, put the world on notice. If we don't make large, unparalleled changes by 2030, we are likely to face extreme difficulties, such as we saw last summer. The Earth's environment and climate have been pushed to breaking point by the current economic paradigm. It is parasitic, late-stage capitalism Madam Speaker, that is sending this planet and its people to hell in a handbasket. The extract and discard model of resource use is not sustainable, and we should not tolerate it here in Tasmania. We can't adequately address the climate emergency without tackling the structural issues that have led to it in the first place, and this is the impetus for a Green New Deal. A Green New Deal has bold, ambitious goals to provide for a fair future where the Tasmanian economy serves all Tasmanians, not just the wealthy, and preserves our environment rather than exploiting. Can you move those now be heard, please?
You were faster.
Speaker,
She's moved that I just need another few minutes. 2 minutes.
For another 2 minutes.
For another 2 minutes?
Yep.
Yes. So the question is that the Leader of the Greens, and the motion be agreed to that he be given another 2 minutes. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those
I
against?
thank the House.
Thank you.
And a Green New Deal will provide for an inclusive transition to a new economy. Rather than desperate band-aid funding to prop up failing regional industries, a Green New Deal will provide unprecedented, apolitical and consistent funding for regions to define their own future. Through unprecedented investment in our people and our island, a Green New Deal can achieve an ambitious future for Tasmania, one where equality and well-being, not GDP, is the most important measure of our society. In many ways, Madam Speaker, Tasmania has a head start on the rest of the world. More than half our landmass is in some form of reserve. We have the Tasmanian Wilderness World Heritage Area. Our society punches above its weight in volunteering and charitable donations. Our economy has a brand and niche products that are the envy of the world. And Madam Speaker, our democracy boasts the Hare-Clark electoral system, widely regarded as the best system in the world. And the one thing I will acknowledge that came out of the Leader of the Opposition's address today is Labor's renewed commitment to donations reform, and thank you for coming on board. We look forward to seeing the legislation, and we would certainly be backing in any moves that led to a stronger, more robust democracy in Tasmania where vested interests can't buy elections.
Thank you.